You have betrayed our order! No one may escape the penalty!
You forget, Lord Chancellor. I'm as good as dead already.
I've replayed the Order 1886 multiple times. During my first playthrough, I completely understood the lukewarm reception. The game was short, lacked gameplay variety, and had a plot that peaked when it was ending. It was frustrating because it felt like it was building up to something. It felt like a prequel, as if there was going to be far more content before the credits rolled. Instead, that was it. The Order 1886 left players on a cliffhanger, one that will more than likely stay that way until Sony decides to continue its story. With all that being said, does the Order 1886 really deserve a sequel? My most recent playthrough has actually softened my stance on the Order. I honestly like this game. It's simple and cinematic, and has an interesting world filled with unique concepts that are begging to be explored. I wanted to know more about the Knights of the Round Table, about the Blackwater and its regenerative properties, and the Order's overall impact on this alternate history London. But the short length of this game left so many questions unanswered, and there are so many narrative threads that have no resolution. By the end of the Order 1886, Grayson, formerly known as Sir Galahad, must escape London and evade his former organization. Former allies turn to foes, and conversely, foes into allies. The Order 1886 had introduced vampires in the last chapters of the game, and a significant character in Lord Hastings was revealed to be a vampire, and Jack the Ripper. Instead of having Grayson turn the tide and begin hunting Lord Hastings and getting resolution for the Order's deceit, the last shot of him is standing out on a balcony like Batman at night looking over London. It resolved nothing and left players feeling empty. But because the world and the concepts within that world are so interesting, I would love to see the Order 1886 get revisited and remade instead of getting an outright sequel. If, on the off chance, the Order 1886 gets a second chance, then I would love for the Order's origins to be explored. As a fan of Arthurian lore, the Knights of the Round Table persisting for centuries and having a significant impact on history is just too juicy to ignore. How many times have certain titles been passed around? It's revealed that Grayson is the third individual to hold the title of Galahad. If the black water from the Grail elongates one's life and damn near heals every wound, how do the others come to pass? It must have been some type of catastrophic event to kill them, right? The Lord Chancellor is the original Lancelot and has a massive impact on the story as the adoptive father of Isi and Alistair, two members of the Order, with the latter being the former Knight Commander. Near the end of the game, Alistair is revealed to be a half-breed, and this has massive consequences for Grayson because the Lycans that they had been fighting had infiltrated the Order, and on top of that, the Lord Chancellor knew. Everything that the Order stood for was a lie, and the Lord Chancellor shielded Alistair out of love for his adopted son. Now, in any other medium, I believe that a parent protecting their child is commendable. But in the case of the Order 1886, the Lord Chancellor was written so poorly that you could tell he was hiding something. The dude was like the loudest person in the game for no reason. Now, the twist to make Alistair a half-breed would have been great if there was some type of significant build-up. You really don't even get to know him, or any character for that matter, because of the game's short length. Every time someone is introduced, they are pushed out of the way for the sake to progress the plot. The length of the game shouldn't matter for a character to make an impact, but when you're telling a story that constantly shifts in background and action, characters are going to get left behind. For the Order, it's a massive problem. When you start this game, Isi, or Lady Igraine, Marquis, and Sebastian are the first members of the Order you meet. Isi and Grayson have a mentor-mentee relationship with hints of romantic undertones. This dynamic is teased on a number of occasions, and there's a moment where Isi, who is grievously wounded in an encounter with a Lycan, longs for a peaceful life with Grayson. Once that moment has passed, she's practically relegated to the background until the end of the game, where she is chasing Grayson as he begins to turn on the Order and is teased as a potential antagonist for the future. Marquis was a fascinating character who felt out of place at times with the seriousness of the Order 1886. He was whimsical and breezy, but also understood the complexities of war and that the motivations for conflict are never clear. He was effective and intelligent and was loyal to Grayson because he knew that organizations like the Order were never as heroic as they seem. Like Isi though, He just disappears until the plot needs him again, and that sucked because I believe the later chapters needed his character. Sebastian, like Grayson, was one of the older knights in the Order and was a true man of honor. He was vigilant and had a strong sense of justice even in the face of certain death. He was a driving force for Grayson's change, and as a character who I also wanted more of. Do you understand where I'm trying to get at? The narrative of the Order was meant to be huge and sprawling. It felt like with every character introduction and the world building that this would be a game pushing the 15 to 20 hours mark, but instead, it was around 5 hours, which is insane because it forces important narrative marks to either be ignored or cut completely. Instead of these characters having the required depth to tell such an emotionally charged story of betrayal and revenge, you get the Cliff Notes version, which is never fine because the scope of the Order 1886 has the feel of an Uncharted or The Last of Us, but plays out like neither. It's a hole that needs to be filled. This is an empty calories game, and it's why I believe that this game should be remade and retold. I just don't believe a sequel would have the same impact. When the Order 1886 was announced, the hype levels were pretty insane. This was a technical showcase for the PS4, and it led everyone to believe that a new franchise was born. Alternate history London with sci-fi weapons built by Nikola Tesla? Dude, sign me the hell up. I get to fight Lycans with a Tesla coil gun? Perfection. What other shenanigans was I going to get into? The answer was not much. Gameplay in the Order is pretty routine. It's a cover shooter and a serviceable one. Weapons that are created by the Order, and there are only 3, by the way, have an alternate fire, and some are pretty spectacular. I particularly enjoyed the thermite rifle, in which you fired a magnesium round that can be ignited to create explosions. Very fun, but it's only limited to a number of areas, which was a pretty big downer. Beyond shooting, it was your standard third-person action affair. There were some stealth sections that ranged from manageable to frustrating, and anyone who believes that mandatory stealth sections with automatic deaths when caught are fun should be asked to face the corner and speak to the wall, because I don't want to hear that shit. It didn't make any sense transitioning from a full-on action game to full-on stealth. Oh, and by the way, there was no real melee to speak of outside of the QuickTime events. And for me personally, I didn't actually mind the QuickTime events, even though I would have preferred just to be able to watch some of them as cutscenes. I thought the QTEs with the Lycans were pretty fun, but really predictable. If you happened to fail these, it had to be because you were curious as to how Grayson would die, because they literally gave you enough time to react. And speaking of the Lycans, these encounters were probably some of the most half-baked in this game and in any game. These monsters are far more threatening in their individual cutscenes than when you actually encounter them in the game. They run at you in a straight line, make one dive at the player, and then run away. And that's it. There's no other strategy required. Just shoot them enough times until they fall, and then follow up with an execution animation. And this blows my mind because how can you take this mythical beast that the Order is actively hunting and have it bogged down to a boringly simple action segment? It makes no sense, and it's a massive flaw that I hope gets rectified if this game gets remade. Give the player more agency when it comes to combat. These are trained knights with massive blades as tertiary weapons. Let them use them in combat. Remove the QTEs and just let them fight it out. Implement a block and a parry, and you have Ghosts of the Order 1886. And yes, this game would be all the better for it. One of the most frustrating things about this game, and I don't think it got talked about enough, is that progression was sometimes slowed or blocked because there were scripted events that couldn't be skipped, because Grayson had to be lined up perfectly before proceeding. There's a section where you had to head to Tesla's lab, and he asks that you look around but not break anything. I believe it's like chapter 2 or 3. So when the player roams around, looks at a few things, and interacts with some objects, he then has to wait until Tesla finishes interacting with another NPC before he walks slowly to a desk, turns to face a certain position, and then you're given the prompt to interact with them. This actually happens multiple times in this game, and every time it did, I rolled my eyes. I understand that the Order 1886 is a technical achievement, especially considering how well it holds up today. I appreciate the detailed animations, character models, and environments, but there were some questionable design choices that I feel were deliberately made to elongate the game. This is a game that works best in motion and when the action is kicking off. I spent more time than necessary looking at a rifle or a crossbow because the NPC that progresses the chapter was taking an inordinate amount of time to kick everything off. It is, in my opinion, the single biggest flaw in this game, and it was also incredibly annoying. All that aside, I firmly believe that right now, the Order 1886 is probably the biggest what if in Sony's library. I understand that there are fans of Legend of Dragoon turning beet red at the thought of this, but the Order 1886 was supposed to be the start of a new franchise. It was going to be one of the heavy hitters. Instead, it obviously underwhelmed critics, and because Sony didn't provide information on the game's commercial performance, it probably didn't hit any of their sales projections. But the IP is still owned by Sony, meaning that any one of its studios, if they were so entranced by this world, could take a shot at reviving it. Like I said before, let's not look for a sequel or a continuation, let's push for a full-on remake. The Order 1886 is a flawed gem. There are a number of things that can be tuned up to ensure that it's ready for modern audiences. In my head, I don't want the Order to be an open world game. I don't mind a linear affair, but give me options during combat. Give me sandbox sections that allow me to flex the new features of the game. Let's dive into the lore a little more. Imagine a prequel section where we, the player, get to actively participate in the formation of the Order. How cool would that be? You get to meet a young King Arthur, a young Lancelot, and other descendants of the Round Table. And, who knows, you might get to see the conflict that started everything. The first battle with the Lycans, the first battle with the vampires or other half-breeds, other supernatural beasts that make up this universe. That would be so much fun to do because then you can kind of show off the melee combat. Right? Another option to that. That would be amazing. I would be a huge fan of that. Give me more information, and this is just for me personally, on that black water coming from the Holy Grail. What's the deal with that? Why does it restore health the way it does? How can it bring me back from near death? What is the curse? There has to be. It has to be a curse. There has to be some type of weird catch because there's no way I'm just drinking this water, healing, giving thumbs up to everyone, and being good to go. There's got to be something else with it. It's got to do something to you as a person. I really feel that was a missed opportunity. I would loved to have just figured that out. I want to see certain characters like Isi and Marquis develop alongside Grayson. If you want to throw Sebastian in there too, go ahead. But if you're also going to introduce an antagonist, don't let it be in the final chapters of the game. And also, if you're going to introduce the antagonists, let us, the player, take action against them. The thing with Alistair is that he's an empathetic character because the Lycans are being hunted. He wants to protect his kind. But that should kind of force us to question the morality of our choice to trying to kill Alistair, right? Because who knows? Maybe the Lycans weren't really the villains. Maybe they're just as complex as people. That conversation was brought up at the end of the game. And I thought that, well, that's something that could have been explored, but it wasn't. And then with Lord Hastings, he's revealed to be like the head vampire, Jack the fucking Ripper. And we just go, all right, guys, I will see you next time. Come on. It's not satisfying. It provides zero impact to the player. It's just poor writing. And I feel like that's one area that can be greatly improved. Now, I'm fairly certain that a remake of the Order 1886 is really low on the priority list of Sony. Let's be real. They have Sly Cooper, Infamous, Resistance, Killzone, and others sitting on the shelves collecting dust. Seriously, Sony, can you bring back Sly Cooper and Resistance? Those are both personal favorites of mine. But the Order is a universe that is rich with content and potential, and one that I feel deserves a second look. And I think that if you replay this game now with an open mind, your stance on it might soften as well. Like every other game that's gonna appear in this series, it's a pipe dream. Some will seem far more feasible than others, and in the case of the Order 1886, it's honestly a far-off fantasy. It is fun to dream, though, especially considering the talent at Sony Studios. Imagine what Santa Monica would do, or Naughty Dog, or even Bluepoint. What's Bluepoint been up to? Are they really going to remake Bloodborne, as all of these rumors that keep persisting online have suggested? I hope so, because that game is going to be featured on this list eventually. Not next. That game, I have to replay that. It's going to be a pain in my ass. But anyway, that's what I'm looking forward to next. I'm hoping that the Order 1886 doesn't just die off. I'm hoping that Sony gives it a small push and says who wants it. And I think that there are a number of studios who could do a lot of good with it. If you like the content, please consider sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.